He's a narco terrorist, drug dealer, illegitimate president, and Trump is going to set the conditions that take him down.
Señores, el día de ayer el canal propagandístico MAGA, Fox News, colapsó en vivo. No sabían qué hacer ni qué decir mientras el país entero veía cómo Donald Trump se arrodillaba una vez más ante Rusia. Y mientras el tema de las protestas No Kings rompió récords como la manifestación pacífica más grande en la historia de Estados Unidos. Todo esto mientras la economía se sigue hundiendo y la aprobación de Donald Trump cae por debajo del 37%. Así que la pregunta era inevitable. ¿Cómo es que Fox News iba a intentar cubrir este desastre? Pues bueno, aquí les voy a mostrar exactamente su estrategia de propaganda. Y sí, señores, porque literalmente se estaban derrumbando en el aire. Vimos a Sean Hannity desesperado, invitó a Lindsey Graham y al senador Marino, dos de los congresistas magas más leales al trumpismo, y bueno, comenzaron a soltar una que otra idea tan absurda que parecía parodia. Veamos la primera: convertir a Venezuela en el estado número 51 de Estados Unidos. Escuchen esto.
I had a chat with you this weekend, and I thought you had a pretty darn good idea, and you said you were going to share it with the president. I want to know if you did, and that is this opposition leader in Venezuela that won the Nobel Prize that said it really deserved to go to Donald Trump. Sounds like a pretty good leader to me for the people of Venezuela, and the end of narco-terrorism and a better relationship with the U.S. Or if they choose maybe the 51st state, I don't know.
Sounds good to me.
Luego, en un momento glorioso, Dan Coe estuvo en Fox y mencionó lo que Trump anda publicando en redes. Videos suyos, defecando sobre manifestantes pacíficos. Amigos, la presentadora se quedó congelada, sin saber cómo reaccionar. Vean esto.
Dan, welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, are you buying what Karine Jean-Pierre is selling?
Look, in terms of the Democratic Party, this weekend was a good analogy. I saw Democrats, Republicans, Independents who were protesting in the millions against a president who is trying to silence us. And the analogy was apt when the president uploaded a video of himself in a king hat.
So Dan, are you going to answer the question?
Yes, I will, but please give me a moment. Literally defecating on people exercising their right to free speech.
I don't think it was literally.
A constitutional right.
Luego Sean Hannity volvió a lo suyo, trayendo al héroe caído del MAGA. Así es, amigos, George Santos. Como bien sabemos, recién liberado, todo esto gracias al famoso indulto del trumpismo, pese a haber robado tarjetas de crédito, pese a haber suplantado identidades y haber usado el dinero de donantes republicanos para gastarlo en cirugías plásticas y en artículos de lujo. Y bueno, ahí está otra vez en Fox. Nada representa mejor al movimiento MAGA que esto.
We've never spoken before. You may not know this, but at one point you were my congressman. I lived in Oyster Bay.
Oh, Sean, I'm very aware. Center Island, that was where you lived. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
To a former constituent. So, and again, I owe you an apology, Sean. I owe the American people an apology, but most importantly, constituents. And I know you were one of them, and it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Luego entró en escena el senador MAGA Marino, que se lució insultando al presidente de Colombia, ¿no? A Gustavo Petro, llamándolo de idiota, porque Petro denunció los crímenes de guerra de Trump tras el bombardeo de barcos pesqueros en el Caribe y, pues bueno, de haber matado a pescadores colombianos.
The good news, Sean, is that in Colombia, the people support America. America supports the people of Colombia. They just have a moronic leader in charge right now, but there's an election next year, and I think that's going to go very differently, and our relationship with Colombia will be back on track after this guy's gone.
Claramente no se detuvo ahí porque el mismo senador volvió a atacar a Petro diciendo que apoya a los carteles. Escuchen.
You're exactly right. And what we have in Colombia is a president that got elected thanks to the help of drug cartels. We're going to continue to investigate that. In fact, we're going to turbocharge that investigation. In the meantime, we're going to put him and his extended family and enablers on the OFAC list, and we're going to designate additional cartels in Colombia as foreign terrorist organizations. Because what President Trump will not put up with is countries that send us poison to kill our citizens.
Después aparece Lindsey Graham, el eterno macho falso de MAGA. Sabe perfectamente que Trump se rindió ante Putin, pero claro, sigue jugando a ser patriota. ¿Dónde quedó el plan de incluir a Putin en la famosa lista de terroristas que él mismo promovió? Acierto, pues Trump, papi Trump, no lo dejó. Y ahora hablan de construir puentes y túneles entre Rusia y Alaska. Nivel de ridiculez impresionante.
He's a narco terrorist, drug dealer, illegitimate president, and Trump is going to set the conditions that take him down.
Y bueno, si creen que eso fue todo, porque no, amigos, no podía faltar el MAGA supremo, MAGA Mike Johnson, atacando a los manifestantes del movimiento No Kings. Los llama antiamericanos, los tacha de odiadores del país, y bueno, solo por haber sido el símbolo de la verdadera democracia. Pero pues están descontentos. Escuchen.
The Young Communist League of New York and all the other radical groups, they're out there championing that issue. Now, listen to these people's own language, Sean, what they stand for. It is completely the opposite of what America was founded upon. They don't like living here. They don't like capitalism or the free enterprise system. They don't like the founding principles of the country, individual freedom and limited government and the rule of law and peace through strength and fiscal responsibility, free markets, human dignity. They're against all of that.
Y mientras ellos dicen que esta gente odia a América, las encuestas no dicen otra cosa. El último sondeo por parte de Gallup nos muestra que los estadounidenses se identifican como demócratas sobre republicanos por un margen de más 7 puntos. Y claro que tiene sentido porque el Partido Republicano se ha convertido en un movimiento extremista, autoritario, un movimiento que está militarizando las calles, destruyendo la economía, quitándole el acceso a salud a millones de personas. Pero bueno, volvamos a MAGA Mike, porque no terminó con su ataque a las protestas.
Yeah, Sean, look, we're seeing a moment of real clarity. The American people can see exactly what is going on right here. These rallies we described as the Hate America rallies because there is no better description. Look at who was involved. Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats went out there to participate. They stood arm in arm, side by side, with some of the most radical groups that have ever assembled on U.S. soil. They openly advertised that they were co-sponsored. They were Soros-funded, and they were co-sponsored by the Communist Party USA, the Young Communist League of New York, and all the other radical groups.
Y luego entra Jesse Watters, quejándose, muy enojado, porque al parecer su propia madre asistió a una de las marchas No Kings. Su madre, la mujer que lo crió, la que le advirtió toda la vida sobre los peligros de vender mentiras por dinero, y bueno, pues ahí lo tienen, convertido en lo que ella temía.
No Kings was a who's who of people with TDS. Even my mom was there.
Después le toca a Greg Gutfeld, otro de los soldados mediáticos de Fox, el cual pues también intentó minimizar las protestas con uno de sus chistes baratos.
I think the part of it is that he knows he's not getting props for his effectiveness, for the things that he's done. So he has to kind of resort to this spotlight chasing. He's pretending that he's like this scrappy underdog, but he really is an elite overdog that hasn't done anything of any difference or value for California, so he has to pick fights.
Y claro, no podía faltar Jessica Tarloff, que entra y los pone en su lugar con argumentos sólidos.
Listen, they're just playing around. I think it's totally fine and kind of innocuous at this point. You know, Rogan has pulled a lot of comedians to the Austin area. Some of them don't like it as much as they expected to. Shane Gillis was very funny about it, how he had a blackout for 3 days. And he's like, I left New York City for this. But, you know, the economy did go from, in California, it was the 6th biggest in the world for Gavin Newsom, and now it's the 4th biggest, which does seem like a change in the positive direction. And I can't do the imitation of his voice like Rogan, but yeah, Fortune 500 companies are headquartered there. Is the weather part of it? Sure. Can you get top talent to want to come and live in a lot of places across California? Sure. Are there issues? Homelessness, crime? Yes. Is it getting better, trending in the right direction? For sure. So I think, Gavin Newsom, you've had him on. He did that debate with DeSantis on Sean's show. He can defend himself pretty well. People, I think, underestimate how wonky he is, and he always has a number, a stat for it. So, if Rogan wants to have the conversation, great.
Pero lo mejor o lo peor llega con Joni Ernst, senadora republicana de Iowa, que al ver los carteles de las protestas, pregunta si los hizo George Soros. En serio, amigos, siguen con ese cuento.
Yes, thank you, Harris. I think it is extremely important that we look at who is funding these protests. We have to get to the bottom of this. It is a much larger organization. It could be the usual suspect, of course, George Soros. But what we have seen in the past, of course, is threat to local governments and property. And so we do need to make sure that these are safe protests.
Y pues sí, Gutfeld otra vez vuelve en escena a hablar todavía más ridiculeces.
I don't think you can measure, I know CNN will come up with it, measure a stat for authoritarianism. It's gone up 137% since 2023. But right now, you can't. If you could measure authoritarianism, as Jesse points out, shutting down schools, parks, and speech would make Joe Biden the king of kings. But you're not going to measure that.
Después, Joni Ernst comienza a comentar sobre Gaza. Dice que casi 50 palestinos han muerto, que Hamas retomó el control y que Israel planea reconstruir asentamientos en Gaza. Todo esto mientras niega la evidencia de que no hay ningún alto al fuego real. La violencia continúa. Los bombardeos sobre el Líbano siguen. Y claro, ella simplemente repite frases vacías.
Yes, it absolutely is. And thank heavens we do have a president of peace, Donald Trump. He has led to this extraordinary moment in time where we now have a fragile ceasefire, but a ceasefire nonetheless between Hamas and Israel. So we need to continue pressing forward. Hamas will continue to disrupt. I mean, we should know that and expect that, but we must be strong through this to bring peace to the region. So again, thanks heavens we have the right people that are leading this movement. We do need the Arab nations, particularly those that have been engaged in the Abraham Accords, to come forward and provide the necessary manpower in Gaza to keep the peace. We need to lean on these Arab countries to do the right thing. If they want peace, they need to be involved.
Y eso básicamente, mis amigos, es el estado actual del trumpismo. Una maquinaria de propaganda desesperada. Están intentando maquillar una derrota política, el colapso económico y una pérdida total de credibilidad. En Fox, sin duda, ya no hacen periodismo, hacen control de daños. Y créanme que lo hacen muy mal. Ahora bien, amigos, una fiscal del gobierno federal, encargada de estos famosos casos en contra de los enemigos políticos de Donald Trump, al parecer envió mensajes de texto, mensajes privados, a periodistas para discutir los detalles de esta investigación secreta. La protagonista es Lindsay Hogan. Así es, amigos, esta abogada que según mi criterio no tiene experiencia previa como fiscal, pero claro, gracias al trumpismo, ahora está detrás de dos de los casos más polémicos que se está viviendo en Estados Unidos. Lo peor es cómo su comportamiento está poniendo en evidencia hasta qué punto el sistema judicial estadounidense está siendo manipulado políticamente desde adentro. Vamos a ver exactamente lo que ocurrió, porque amigos, esta historia ya nos dice mucho sobre cómo el trumpismo está intentando controlar no solo la política, sino la justicia.
Joining us now, MSNBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. and Lawfare's legal fellow and courts correspondent, Anna Bower. Anna had an interesting few days. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Ken, let me start with you. This legal filing, a lot of words, a lot of different ways to say one thing. This case is political retribution, and that is illegal under the law.
Yeah, that's right, Katie. And in fact, what they're saying is Exhibit A, of course, is Donald Trump's Truth Social post, which may or may not have been intended as a direct message to his attorney general, where he called Comey a bad guy and said that he should be prosecuted. And it's just really hard to argue with that. I mean, it's out there for the world to see. But Comey does, and his lawyers do, include a raft of other evidence in this motion, including the fact that the Justice Department fired his daughter, who is a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, without cause. But what's really interesting to me is that after amassing this set of evidence in this lengthy motion, essentially Comey's lawyers make this pitch to the judge. Look, if you don't want to rule in our favor based on this information, let us have discovery and we'll have an evidentiary hearing. And what that means is they will want to get all the communications between the White House and the Justice Department about the Comey case and all the machinations about the career prosecutors who didn't want to move this case forward and who in the White House was pushing who in the Justice Department to bring the case forward. And all that would buttress a case that this was a vindictive and selective prosecution. If they get that, this is going to take a long time, first of all, for the DOJ and the White House to produce. There'll be battles over which documents get produced. But we will learn a lot more than we know now about exactly how this case came to be. And that will be fascinating.
That right there is really interesting, Tom.
Well, it sure is. And look, to state the obvious, maybe it would be exceedingly unusual for a district judge to allow that kind of discovery into the behind the scenes machinations and the discussions among prosecutors and the president. That said, this is an extraordinary case. My sense is that this motion, I don't think is likely to succeed in getting this indictment thrown out, at least at this time. I'm not faulting the defense for bringing it. If I were in their shoes, I would litigate this case aggressively. I would take that shot. But the standards for getting a case dismissed on grounds of vindictive or selective prosecution are so high.
Well,
so many motions are filed and none
succeed. If this doesn't meet it, what does?
Well, maybe nothing does. But the fact is that judges are extremely reluctant, to say the least, to throw a case out on these grounds. I think they have much better chance of taking the shot at the appointment process through which Lindsay Halligan got this job. That also presumably would lead to dismissal of the indictment and is a far less legally difficult, complex road for the judge to travel if he wants to throw this case out.
I can feel you wanting to chime in.
I was going to say, I agree with Tom that is the better of the two legal arguments, but I just want to underscore from their brief how unusual this particular case is, because I can't think of any other circumstance in which a criminal defendant comes forward and says, these are the things the president of the United States has said about me. So I'm going to read from the brief. Among other things, President Trump has publicly called, and these are all quotes, Mr. Comey a corrupt piece of garbage, a disgraced liar and leaker, a weasel, a weak and untruthful slimeball, and very sick or very dumb. Those statements reveal a deep personal animus toward a perceived political enemy. And the standard for vindictive prosecution, which is a separate legal concept than selective prosecution, is about a particular person's animus toward the defendant. It's hard for me to conceive of a case with more animus than this one.
Yeah, you know, you keep correcting me because I keep mislabeling it as a selective prosecution. And you lawyer me and you say, you know, you got to get your terms right. It's vindictive. I guess I'm just
they're doing both.
I'm stuck on this, though. Why even have it if there's never going to be a case that amounts to it? If you have the president of the United States in a direct message that was public or a public message, whatever, saying, I want these people prosecuted, how does that not meet the standard? And if it doesn't, what's the point of having it?
Well, I mean, I think the point of having it is to ensure to the greatest extent possible that justice is not corrupted by personal vendettas and vindictive motives and the like.
Yeah.
But look, the thing here is that the government is going to be able to credibly say, look, yes, absolutely, Trump hates Jim Comey. I mean, you know, you could have gone on for 10 minutes with those sorts of things that he said about him. No question about it. But I think they would say, look, there is some evidence here from the government's perspective that would support a conviction. And so let the process play out rather than throw this out. If there was no evidence supporting it whatsoever, then maybe you would have a vindictive prosecution argument. But I think what they would say here is, look, yeah, it is vindictive, it's retributive, but there is some evidence supporting it, so that's why it should go to a jury. That's the defense.
Anna, let's talk about Lindsay Halligan. So we have her in this prosecution of James Comey. She's also prosecuting Letitia James, and you had, I guess I'll call it an interesting experience with her regarding the Tish James reporting, which, by the way, wasn't even yours.
Yeah, it was a very highly unusual interaction that we just published all of these text messages yesterday. Lindsay Halligan, who again, contextualizing this, sitting United States attorney handling two of the most high-profile prosecutions in the country against the president's perceived political enemies, reached out to me in a text message, unsolicited, to object to a tweet that I wrote in which I summarized someone else's reporting, particularly a New York Times story in which I summarized reported grand jury testimony. Now, look, this is highly unusual for a number of reasons. One of them being that, typically federal prosecutors just don't talk publicly about ongoing prosecutions, and they typically don't really get anywhere near the subject of grand jury testimony because there are Justice Department policies and federal rules that prohibit the disclosure of any matters that occur before a grand jury. So all of this was very surprising to me. And, look, I had never seen an interaction between a U.S. attorney and a journalist like this. Neither had my editor, who has been reporting on legal affairs for decades. In the course of reporting our story, we spoke to multiple former federal prosecutors, legal journalists, and none of them had ever seen an interaction like this either. So I think that it really underscores the lack of experience here. Lindsay Halligan had never been a prosecutor before she got into this position. And it also, again, I will also remind people as well that all of it was on the record. And so also seems to underscore some kind of lack of understanding of how to engage with the media as a person who's a high-profile public figure. Although, she certainly has experience engaging with the media given her past.
Ok, señores, para empezar, vamos a dejar clara las reglas. Una fiscal federal no puede ni debe hablar con la prensa sobre casos activos, menos sobre temas relacionados con un gran jurado. Esto es una regla básica del Departamento de Justicia. Todo lo que pasa en un gran jurado es confidencial. Y esto es precisamente para evitar que el proceso se contamine con personas externas o con intereses políticos. Sin embargo, Lindsay Halligan, una persona que nunca había trabajado como fiscal antes, rompe el protocolo para intentar controlar la narrativa mediática sobre una de estas acusaciones que afecta directamente a los enemigos del trumpismo. Bueno, pues esto no solo es una falta ética profesional, ¿no? Es una muestra clarísima de cómo es que se está utilizando el poder judicial como herramienta política. Halligan no actúa como una servidora pública imparcial, está actuando como una operadora de campaña. Y esto encaja perfectamente en este patrón que hemos visto con Donald Trump y con sus socios de campaña. Nombrar a leales políticos sin experiencia. Pete Hegseth. ¿Qué es Pete Hegseth? Es el actual secretario de defensa, secretario de guerra. ¿Qué hacía antes? Era de Fox. Tenemos a esta señorita, Lindsay Halligan. ¿Qué hacía antes? Abogada, pero que nunca tuvo un caso de este estilo. Ningún caso penal. Ningún caso como fiscal encima. Y les puedo nombrar una variedad de casos, amigos, que hemos visto en este gabinete. Pero bueno, colocarlos en puestos claves. Usarlos para blindar al presidente. O por último, para atacar a sus rivales, ¿no? Tenemos a William Barr. Tenemos a Jeffrey Clark. Y claro, también lo vemos con Lindsay Halligan. Además, hay que destacar algo muy importante. Halligan no solo está involucrada en el caso contra Letitia James, también está liderando esta acusación contra James Comey, el exdirector del FBI al que Trump lleva años queriendo destruir. O sea, literalmente, una misma persona está manejando los casos contra dos de los principales enemigos personales de Trump. No es una coincidencia, ¿no? Ahora yo sé que algunos defensores del trumpismo me dirán, bueno, pues ella solo estaba aclarando una información errónea. Excusas y excusas. Los fiscales, si es que no lo saben, tienen canales oficiales para poder corregir o aclarar información solo si es necesario. No tienen por qué estar mandando mensajes personales a periodistas para discutir testimonios confidenciales, no al estilo de Pete Hegseth. Y menos aún cuando esos mensajes parecían tener esta intención de corregir la narrativa pública para que sea a favor del gobierno de Trump. Esto es a lo que conocemos como politización del sistema judicial y es una de las amenazas más graves para la democracia. Cuando el poder judicial se convierte en un instrumento del presidente, ya no hay justicia independiente, solo queda la venganza política. Donald Trump, que lleva años gritando que el sistema judicial está politizado, que hay una cacería de brujas en su contra, y mientras su propia gente está haciendo exactamente eso desde el sistema. En resumen, amigos, el caso de Lindsey Hooligan nos demuestra que el proyecto de Donald Trump no solo fue regresar al poder, sino que realmente es reconstruir el Estado para que él le sirva. Cuando los fiscales se comportan como un tipo de matón judicial, ya no solo es una investigación lo que está en juego, es la credibilidad de todo el sistema judicial estadounidense. Pero bueno, ¿qué opinan ustedes? ¿Creen que esto solo fue un error ético o una estrategia deliberada del entorno trumpista? Todo con la finalidad de manipular estos procesos judiciales. Los leo en los comentarios. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme en este video. Recuerden, como siempre, déjame tu like, comparte el contenido y suscríbete al canal. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.